Now, the U.S. First Lady Melania Trump is in Ghana Wednesday as she continues her Africa tour that will also take her to Malawi, Kenya, and Egypt. VOA White House correspondent Patsy Widakuswara is covering Mrs. Trump and reports from Lilongwe in Malawi.
On her second day in Ghana, First Lady Melania Trump visited the Cape Coast Castle, one of about 40 slave castles built on the Gold Coast of West Africa by European traders. From Ghana, Mrs. Trump is scheduled to visit Malawi's capital, Lilongwe, where many people who spoke to VOA didn't know much about the trip.
No, I don't know.
You don't know? You haven't heard of it?
Yes.
But do you know anything about her?
No, I just know that it's the wife to the President of America.
But this auto rickshaw driver looked forward to her visit.
Whatever she can bring, if she can sit down with the leaders and see what areas can she help.
I'm asking you all to join me today.
Mrs. Trump is in Africa as part of her Be Best campaign, focusing on child wellness.
I'm here with one goal: helping children and our next generation.
I think this is an opportunity for the United States to show her more human, softer side. When you look at what she's doing, focusing on maternal and child care, focusing on education, it's a much softer issues, development issues. It's essentially a very conventional, paint by the numbers trip for a First Lady that her predecessors had done similar trips.
President Donald Trump has been criticized for his past reported disparaging comments about African countries. Joshua Maservi from the Heritage Foundation says Mrs. Trump's visit should not be expected to counter her husband's rhetoric.
People understand that she's the First Lady, she's not an elected U.S. government official. She is a representative, of course, but First Ladies have this unique position within administrations, and so I think that people will understand that this is a goodwill tour, that this is designed just to highlight her personal priorities around this Be Best campaign.
Countries like Malawi depend on American aid programs. USAID programs in Africa were slated for significant cuts in the Trump administration's proposed budget, but have been blocked by Congress. Despite 50 years of peaceful independence, Malawi remains one of the poorest countries in the world. More than half of its population of 17 million people live below the poverty line. The First Lady is expected to visit Malawi to highlight the Trump administration's support through U.S. aid programs before continuing her tour to Kenya and Egypt. Patsy Widakuswara, VOA News in Lilongwe, Malawi.
Now, for more on the U.S. First Lady's visit to Ghana's Cape Coast, Professor Kwaku Nuamah from American University here in Washington and a native of Ghana joins us live via Skype. Professor Nuamah, thank you for joining us on Africa 54. Let's break it down for us here. What is the big significance here on Melania Trump's visit to the Cape Coast specifically, and especially when you look at the history of the slavery here in America and also for Africa?
Thank you, Esther. So Cape Coast Castle is representative of the slave trade. It is a reminder of our past wrongs and shared responsibilities in righting those wrongs. I think that going there, she has an opportunity to send a strong message to the world and to also initiate a dialogue with people of African descent, particularly in this country, who feel as though the Trump administration has not been respectful of Africa and not being interested in having a dialogue with the continent. So it's a good place to go to be reminded of the responsibilities that we have to each other, but also to remind us of the opportunities that we can craft out of this painful past for better relations going forward.
Leaving the presidency out, the First Lady has, obviously made a big step going to Africa, starting with your country of Ghana. What do you think the overall message for, the Africans, what do they really feel about this visit?
Well, I've seen some of the reports that suggest that Africans don't know what to make of it. I think that it's a good first step. It says that the administration cares about Africa, even though the policy doesn't seem to suggest that. It's a good beginning. And my message would be that Mrs. Trump should not be a tourist, but be an advocate for the things that matter to Africans. And so that's what she can do to help Africa, be an advocate. make sure that your husband's policies do not hurt the people of Africa.
Professor Kwaku, I totally think that there has been quite a significance in her visit, especially when you look at the children that she's been visiting and her Be Best campaign. Professor Kwaku, thank you very much for joining us today. Professor Kwaku Nuamah is from the American University here in Washington, D.C. Now, in a series of interviews with VOA, D.C. Africa policy expert discussed the impact of Melania Trump's first solo international trip to Africa. And last week, President Trump rejected globalism when addressing the UN General Assembly. Compared with President Trump, John Campbell, a senior fellow for Africa Policy Studies at the Council on Foreign Relations, says the First Lady's trip sends a different message.
Well, first of all, I would say there is indeed a contrast. I would also point out that the First Lady is most associated with her Be Best campaign, having to do with maternal and child health, which is a cluster of issues altogether separate from security issues. I see this as very much the First Lady's own trip. And therefore, the issues that she is going to be talking about are going to be ones that are of particular concern to her. Her message, when you talk about the universality of values, that's a message that I think everyone can share in and can understand. When the president is talking about universality, particularly with respect to security issues, he's more focused on a more narrow and specific set of concerns.
Now, on the contrary, Joshua Mbeserve, senior policy analyst at the Heritage Foundation, argues that despite President Trump's rhetoric, the couple's message has been consistent.
Yeah, I think it's actually consistent. So President Trump's remarks at the UN were interesting in that he believed, or as he said, that sovereignty, national sovereignty, is actually the basis of a functional, working global system. So clearly, it's different from sort of extreme globalists who would say, well, there shouldn't be any such thing as borders. He absolutely rejects that, it seems, from his UN remarks and his other remarks and policies. But the fundamental point was that, again, strong sovereign nations are best equipped to ensure a stable and hopefully prosperous global society.
Now, analysts say whether the trip draws a contrast or it's a fundamentally unified message from different perspectives, the U.S. policy toward Africa has not changed much under the Trump presidency.